Hi all. We had a technical difficulty with the recording when it switched over to the document camera today in class, so I'm re-recording this during lunch. So today we're going to do Chapter 1, Activity 1. We're going to review our percents and decimals, learn about basic statistics terminology, and identify pitfalls of analysis. So the first thing we want to do is review converting between a decimal and a percent and a fraction. So let's take a second and review what the number means. So if I take the number 0.326, this is the ones place value, the tenths, like dimes, the hundredths, and the thousandths place value. Okay. So if we take 0.326, that really means 326 thousandths of one whole. Now, since percent means literally out of 100 per 100, what we need to do is convert that from per 1 to per 100. And the easiest way to do that is multiplying by 100. So 0.326 times 100%, which is also known as 1, is 32.6%. So take just a second and convert between these problems right here. So convert between the decimal and the percent form. I'll give you a minute to do that. So you can check your work here. Now, how do we use these decimals and percents and fractions? Well, let's take a look at a student-centered problem here, number B. Jade scored 38 out of 45 points on a psychology test and 53 out of 70 points on a chemistry test. Jade's friend said that she did better on the chemistry test because she scored more points, 58 versus 38. Sorry, 53 versus 38. Is the friend correct? Explain your reasoning, including numbers. So I'm going to pause the video, have you pause the video and work through that problem, and then see what you come up with in just a minute, okay? So what did you come up with? Well, on the psychology test, Jade scored 38 out of 45, which is 0.844. And on the chemistry test, it was 53 out of 70, which I believe turned out to be 0.76. Okay. So on the psychology test, Jade scored 84.4% of all the points available, even though it was had fewer points, and 76% rounded to the nearest percent on the chemistry test. So you're right that Jade's friend is incorrect. Jade scored a higher percentage on the psychology test. Okay. All right. Now that we've done a little bit of review here, it's time to introduce some of our terminology. So take a second and look at the book, section 1.1, section 1.2. I believe pages 4 and 13 would be great to look at. But define these two terms, and we'll have you pause the video while you look up those 4 terms. Now that you're back, the population is an entire collection of items or people, where a sample is a part, sometimes referred to as a subset of the entire population. A parameter is something, a measurement of the entire population. Oh, let me spell that. Let me try that again. So a measurement of the entire population. Okay. Where a statistic is a description or measurement of just a sample. And why do we talk about samples? If we could get the entire population, we'd have an exact answer. If we only take part of the population, our answer is not going to be exact. It'll only be approximate or close, but not exact. So why should we take samples? Well, if we talk about population, for many people, the first thing that comes to mind is all the people that live in a country. So if we were to take a look at all Americans, we're talking about over 300 million people. And many times, populations are so large, it's impossible to get to every single one of them. So what we can do is take a part of the population, a sample, and if we take care in how we choose that sample, then we can get a really close, maybe not exact, but really close number, but only have to do a whole lot less work than asking everyone. So populations may be very large, or hard to access everyone. Okay. All right. Now, I like to read books or listen to audiobooks to help me become a better teacher, sometimes just for fun. I listened to a book called iGen, and one of the things that they talk about in there is social media addiction, specifically of people, young adults. So if I wonder if Americans aged 18 to 25 are addicted to social media, what would I do? How would I apply what we've learned here? Let's identify the population, a sample, and at least 3 things or questions that we need to consider if we were to study social media addiction. So let me have you pause for just a second, see if you can fill those out, and then we'll talk back together here in just a minute. Okay. So the population would be all Americans aged 18 to 25, and a sample would be a subgroup or a subset of all Americans aged 18 to 25. Now, if I were in charge of this study, there's lots of things that I'd need to consider. One of the things that I'd want to consider is, if we're talking about social media addiction, what's the definition or what constitutes social media addiction? Does that mean that they are on social media more than 1 hour a day, more than 2 hours a day, more than 4 hours a day? How are we going to declare what social media addiction means? I'll let you think up a couple more things to finish that out so we can turn to the back page here. Sometimes we need to subdivide a population into groups, 2 or more groups, so that we can then compare subgroups against each other like they're smaller populations. So if we were to analyze the texting habits of young adults in America, this box would represent all young adults. And we have a variety of ways that we could break this down. One way that is often done is by gender. So we might break this down by males, females, LGBTQ, and other. What we could do then is take a sample from each of the categories, and then using those sample data, pretend like this was a whole population, this was a whole population, this was a whole population, and this was the whole population. We could then compare the parts of the entire population against each other, and we could treat the males as one population, the females as a different population, even though that they are, and LGBTQ as a different population and other as well, even though they all constitute the entire population of young adults. Okay. Now, when we're doing studies and analyzing data, sometimes we run into difficulties. And one way that we gather data is with a survey, but surveys can have some drawbacks. One of the problems with a survey is if it's a voluntary response sample, sometimes called a self-selected sample. So take a second, see if you can research what a voluntary response sample is and why it can give bad results. Okay. Hopefully you found out that a voluntary response sample is when people themselves decide whether to be included in the survey. And why does it often give bad results? Well, the people that take the survey are people that are very strongly for or against this survey. You typically don't have the people that don't care as much take the time to take the survey. So the people who feel strongly one way or the other take the survey, and we don't hear from the people in the middle who don't care as much. Because of this, we don't get an accurate representation of what the entire group feels like, only the people at the extremes. Now, take a minute and give an example of a real-world voluntary sample and how it could give bad results. Where have you seen these in real life? Okay. All right, after you've done that, let's go to number 3C. We also talk about some other pitfalls when you're analyzing the data. One of the pitfalls is when people tell you or self-report the data without actually having it measured or verified. And this can lead to errors. So do you think that asking people in a survey how much money they would make suffer from self-reported data bias or error? In class, we said yes. Why? Well, people may exaggerate or lie about how much money they make. Maybe it makes them feel better. So if we did that, if we weren't aware of that, our answers might be too high, because if many people are lying and rounding up on how much money they're making, we might think that people are making a lot more money than they are. Okay. So what I want you to do now is go to the end of section 1.1, whether it's the order of the questions or misleading conclusions or whatever. Pick two other pitfalls, not just the self-reported data one that we just did. I want you to name them, briefly describe each one of them, and then make up your own real world possible example of each and write your responses here in the space below. And once you've completed this activity, remember to take pictures of it, turn them into PDFs, and upload them into the Chapter 1, Activity 1 assignment. And make sure you do that by tomorrow night, okay? Or actually by tomorrow night.